Hello creeps, Andy here, and today I have my January 2024 reading wrap up. So I somehow managed to read 10 full-length novels this month. I'm not sure if you can see them all, and I'm not really sure how I did that. Well, I guess it's because I was sick the first half of the month, that's probably why, but usually I read about 8 books a month. So yeah, this was a nice little surprise for me that I got all of this reading done, but I've got a lot to talk about for each of these books. So let's just kind of jump in. A few of them I did discuss in my last video, so I won't go into detail with those few, and I'll kind of redirect you to that video if you're curious about them. But otherwise, let's just get into it. The very first book that I read this year was The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I have been in the mood for just wintry, snowy thrillers this year. Now that doesn't really make sense because I live in California and, well, I live in LA and it does not snow here. And so I'm not sure why that is, but there's just, I don't know, there's something in the air, and I just want to read all of these really snowy books. So yeah, I started out with Lucy Foley's The Hunting Party. And I actually did take better notes, or I started to, at the beginning of the year, so I can kind of give you a little bit more in-depth analysis. Considering I read so many books, I started taking a few notes for each one, so I'm going to kind of use this as my guide to discuss each of these books. Okay, so how I felt about this one. Actually, let me tell you what it's about. It's about these friends that every year they go and stay at a new location for a vacation. They go on a vacation. Jeez, what, am I a robot? Why am I talking like that? They go on a vacation for New Year's Eve. Vacation? Am I saying that weird? Vacation? They go and stay somewhere for New Year's Eve, and they're a group of friends from college, and so most of them have been friends for a very long time, and then there's, you know, 1 or 2 girlfriends of people that are there as well. And you have different perspectives of the story being told from different people. So there are people that own, or that I guess work at the place that they're staying. You get their perspective. You get a few perspectives of a few of the members that are coming there. The story also begins by telling you that a body has been found, and you just don't know whose body it is. And then as you go through the story, you're kind of guessing, okay, maybe it's this person, maybe it's that person, and then, you know, it's like a whodunit. You know, you're trying to figure out who killed this person. So now let's get into how I felt about this one. Okay, let me start by saying I really enjoy Lucy Foley books. The past 2 that I've read, The Paris Apartment and The Guest List, I really enjoyed those. This one, I really enjoyed about 85% of it. The first 85%, I was totally in it with them. I was invested in the characters. I really enjoyed it. I really like her slow burns, her character forward plots. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't mind tropes in my books or my movies, but there is one specific trope, and I can't tell you what it is because it'll give the whole book away, but there's one specific trope where I'm like, that's lazy writing. Just straight up, that's lazy writing. There's no way around it. I'm just so over this trope, and maybe I'll talk about it separately in a different video without giving the plot of a specific book away, but it's one trope that really bothers me. Yeah, it's one of those books where you're just like, that trope ruined the ending. And so that's unfortunate because I really do enjoy her writing. I really like how she describes things, and like I said, her character development throughout the stories, but that was a bummer. I wrote that this trope is definitely a cop-out, and I stand by that. I did, however, think that this was interesting because you get a lot of past relationships with these friends, and it's just kind of interesting to see what happens when people come back together that maybe aren't the closest but used to be close when you're younger. Like, think about the friendships you had in college or high school and how different everybody is now, you know? And so it is kind of an interesting plot to set a bunch of people who were close at one time in an area and kind of, you know, set it on fire and see what the characters do. So I did think it was an interesting thing, and it's one of those, you know, everyone has a past and a secret kind of thing. Oh, I also wrote, love rich assholes discomfort. So yeah, I like reading about rich people that are uncomfortable, so that was fun. Next up, Ruth Ware. This one was One by One by Ruth Ware. Kind of the same idea, but a little bit different. It's this group of people who started an app. I can't remember what the app's called now, but they go to the French Alps and they end up getting stuck in an avalanche and maybe some people start getting knocked off one by one and they're trying to figure out what happened. Same thing, you have alternating perspectives. You have people that run the particular chateau that they're staying at, or whatever you call it. I actually don't even know what a chateau is, but you know, the fucking place that they're staying. And oh wait, chalet, that's what I was trying to say. What's a chateau? Okay, anyways, it's a rustic ski chalet, and again, you have these like rich people who made this company. This one was made a little bit more complex by the issues that the app is having and by how the people that have gone to the chalet are kind of divided. That's kind of all I'll say, 'cause again, I don't want to give too much away, but I also took notes on this one. Now, I will say that typically the things that I don't like about thriller books are pretty here in this one, but I really enjoyed this one. And I don't know if it was because I read this one before it and I was so disappointed in the ending that this one I was like, you know, at least it wasn't a trope like that kind of ruined the ending for me. So I'm not sure if it was that, but there were a lot of things that I actually really did enjoy about this book. It had a bit of everything. It had a lot of character development and a few tense moments, and there were a few questionable choices by the people, you know, that were trapped there, but you did feel trapped with them, and I felt like it wasn't ridiculous things. It wasn't like, oh, a killer's in the house, let's run upstairs. They really were trapped after this avalanche and they couldn't be rescued, they couldn't get out, their phones weren't working, so you really did get that sense that they were kind of stuck there. I really did enjoy the setup. I thought the app aspect was pretty interesting and something that I've never really read before. There aren't a million twists and turns. I wrote, thank goodness. I really liked this quote. I found that I couldn't stand to be there with the people still walking in that perpetual golden sun while I lived in a place that was black with guilt and grief. There were a few really, you know, great quotes like that spread throughout. And I wrote, I'm a hoe for books about grieving and trying to make peace and attempting to begin your life after loss. Okay. I said, again, love rich, arrogant a-holes being tested. Man, I got something against rich people, don't I? I wrote that the ending was important to drive the meaning home for me, which is making amends with the past and trying to move forward. So that's where I'll leave that one. But yeah, I actually really did enjoy that. Next I have A House with Good Bones. So I did a whole video on 2023 books. I'll leave that linked down below. So the next 3 are from that video. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is just about a woman who stays with her mother. Her mother starts acting weird and thinks that the house is haunted, and so the daughter is trying to figure out why her mom's acting weird. It was good, and I did think that there were some fun creepy scenes in there, but at the end of the day it did kind of turn into a fantasy. It did turn more fantasy, and I'm just not into fantasy, unfortunately, but I enjoyed the writing and really liked the characters. Next I read Not Forever But For Now by Chuck Palahniuk. This one I would not recommend to everyone. It is a very weird book, I'm not gonna lie. There are some horrible things in there about brothers copulating and doing that with corpses and murder and all sorts of horrendous stuff in there. It doesn't go into too much detail, but there's some messed up lines, but it's all, you know, an analogy for the writer's pain, and I thought that on some level that it was a pretty good book. I mean, I really enjoyed this, but I love Chuck Palahniuk. I don't know that I would just kind of recommend that to the masses because it's a weird read, you know? But if you like his work, I also don't know if you're gonna like it. It's kind of a strange book, but if you like really messed up things and you like digging for your own meaning, then it might be worth a read to you. Next up, I read Joe Nesbo's The Night House. This one was just not for me. A horror story about a young boy that gets sucked into a phone booth, and his friend who was with him when that happened, the cops are kind of questioning and don't really believe, and weird things start happening around him, so they start following him. They send him to an institution, and it's broken into 3 parts. All 3 parts are very different. It's just one of those books where you get to the end and you're like, what did I just read, and why? It was just, I don't know, not for me. The next one that I read was 7 Layer Slayer by Addison Moore. This is the Murder in the Mix series that I've been reading, 1 a month, because they each correlate to 1 month of the year. Yeah, I will be probably reading 1 of these a month. It's the same plot as I've told you on the other 4. I think this is number 5 in the series. There's just a murder in a small town, and this cute baker tries to solve it because she is in quenchable thirst for justice or something like that. Insatiable thirst for justice. Yeah. So yeah, just a cute book, you know, it is what it is. Now this is the one that I want to spend the most time on. This is Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi. And I loved this book. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I posted about it and talked about how much I love it. But we're going to spend a few minutes on this one because this was one of the best horror books I've read in a very long time. I was so surprised. I don't know how I've never heard of this writer before. This is a story about young boys who are orphans. So they live in an orphanage, but the orphanage is run by priests. And one day a man comes to the orphanage and he has like satanic inscriptions carved throughout his body. He ends up dying and releasing an evil that spreads through this orphanage. That's what the beginning of the book says. So I'm not giving anything away, but there's so much that I want to talk about here. First of all, such a unique setting. It takes place in 1904, I think. It takes place in 1905. Man, hold on. I took better notes. I think I took a picture of it. You get varying viewpoints from different boys and priests at the school. And it's in present tense, which usually, I mean, I've talked about present tense a lot in books and how it can be used in a really great way, but also how a lot of times it takes me out of the story. So what I loved about this one is that present tense is really good for high suspense, low character development, for things like whodunits. In those particular stories, you don't have to get to know the characters too well. Usually everyone's hiding a secret because you're trying to figure out who has done whatever crime there is, usually a murder. And so you don't get to know the characters fully, and you go along with the characters to try to discover different things out to try to solve this crime. And so the suspense is really high, but the character development is usually low. But what is absolutely fucking genius about this book is our main character, oh yes, his name's Peter. His chapters are written in first person and everyone else's chapters are written in third person. And so this allows the suspense of that present tense being used, but then it also allows us to get close to the character and feel sympathy and empathy and a connection towards them. So I thought that that was so genius. I'm sure other books do that, but none that I can think of off the top of my head. And so because a lot of present tense books kind of bring me out of the story, I just prefer books in past tense. I thought that this was such a genius way of writing. It just made sense. I wasn't brought out of the story at all. I loved every fucking page of this book. If I was going to recommend one book, well, definitely this year to read, but probably in the past like 6 months of horror books that I've read, it would be this one. Like honestly, if we have similar tastes, if you feel like you watch my videos and think, you know, we find the same books interesting, pick this one up. You will not be disappointed, I promise you. Okay, there are a lot of characters that you need a little information on because it's a whole orphanage. So again, I think it's a testament to the good writing that you can keep everybody kind of in order, even though there's so many characters. There were so many good lines in this book. Let me see if I could read a few to you. I mean, I'm gonna go on and on about this, so I apologize, but also I don't because this book was so good. Oh, one I posted on Instagram. I'm sorry I drank her blood, but it tasted so fucking good. Oh man, so many great lines. There's something we must do, and I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I'll need your eyes. There's so many lines in here that just made you go, ugh. And a lot of the quotes on here said that it felt like a classic horror novel. And so what I'll say is this book made me feel like when I was younger and I watched a horror movie for the first time. So that same like intense feeling where it's obviously not the most unique story, the plot premise, right? Like obviously that's a trope that has been done a million times, but because of the location, because of the writing style, because of the brutality of the story, it added so much originality to it that it did make you feel like you were experiencing something fresh and new for the first time. And I absolutely loved that. I mean, there's so much stuff that I also, because this was the book club between me and my best friend this month, he picked this one out, so thank goodness he did because I loved it. There are a lot of things to analyze with the religious aspects of the book. Obviously it's priests, so it's something that I don't feel like you can overlook, but I do almost feel like under the surface, again, I'm going to be annoying and analyze it. Not saying this was the writer's intent, but for me it felt a little bit almost like parallel to Children of the Corn. And what I mean by that is I think it's a comment on religion can be a beautiful, great, amazing thing, but it can also be really fucking dangerous if it's used to push someone's narrative that isn't the best person. Also interesting that the people that you think should be the good people or the bad people, it's all kind of conflated and mixed around, and morality is kind of blurred in this book too. It's not overly descriptive and bloody the way that other horror novels are, but there is enough action to keep you absolutely entertained. But here's the thing, growing up, my goal in life was to try to explain to people that horror is so much more than blood and guts. That was always what I was trying to get my friends and coworkers or whomever that I talked to, you know, interested in horror. And this is the type of book that does that, because it's not just horror. There's a little bit of romance in here, coming of age. There's a lot of struggles with religion, faith, loneliness, coming to terms with your place in the world. It's so much more than just blood and guts, but my God, does the blood and guts add so much to the story. It's definitely creepy at times. It's so entertaining, and I really did love every page. I wrote, it made me laugh, it made me tear up, it frightened me. It was touching, heartbreaking, and heartwarming. It was just a little bit of everything. So I apologize for talking so much about this book, but I promise you, if we have similar tastes and you pick that up, you will not be disappointed. Okay, that was a lot. Next, I read Sherry Lapina's Someone We Know. This is a thriller about a boy who sneaks into people's houses. He goes through their computers to try to find out things about them, and then his parents find out and get really upset. I always leave my little guys in books, and then I lose them, and then I find them like a month later. Anyways, then there's a man whose wife disappears and the cops get involved and they're trying to figure out what happened to her. She ends up turning up dead, and so they have a few suspects and they're going back and forth trying to figure out who killed her. Now, this is like quintessential present tense third person book that just grinds my gears. I just don't particularly love the way that I mean, Sherry Lapina only uses present tense from the books that I've read of hers, and it works in whodunits. She has a really great whodunit, the overnight guest, the something guest, the unwanted guest. I really enjoyed it in that, but books like this, I don't know. And how I was talking about how successful Boys in the Valley was for me because they used that present tense, third person, but then also first person. This was in third person the whole time until one page at the end, and then it switched to first person. I was like, what was the point of that? It was just a weird choice. And yeah, I just have an issue. The whole book, I mean, if I just read you, like, he watches them be interviewed. She's shaking her head. She glances over at the window. Does she see him? It just feels so repetitive to me. And so this book was definitely not my favorite because of that, and because of the writing style mainly. Not that it's written poorly, but just that author's preferred writing style is not the preferred style that I like to read. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying it's a horrible book. It just wasn't one for me. But yeah, that's just kind of like one of those typical thriller books that I pick up and at the end I'm like, okay. Also, might I add, like I said, there's a few suspects in the murder of this woman, and all of the women characters are like, my husband wasn't cheating on me, or was he? My husband wouldn't murder her, or would he? I mean, I've been married 3.5 years. I've been together with my husband for 10. I would not think he was cheating on me and murdering other people. It just seemed weird that every single woman was questioning whether their husband was capable of murder. I'm like, what is going on in your marriage? Are you guys okay? Maybe call a therapist, marriage counselor. I don't know. It seemed a little weird to me. I don't know. Maybe I would feel differently if I were in that situation, but I don't think so. Next, I read Wayward by Blake Crouch. This is 2 in the Wayward Pines series. This was about a man who gets stuck in this town called Wayward Pines, and he can't figure out how to leave. There's a big fence and he doesn't know if it's keeping him in or other things out. Dun, dun, dun. It's a really interesting story, the first one. The second one just kind of picks up where the first one left off, and I feel like is maybe just a bridge between the first and second. Not a whole lot happens in this book. It's just kind of an extension of the first. Nothing really new happens, and so I'm really interested to read the third one because it did, I think, set up everything for the third one to continue and for like shit to hit the fan, you know? But this one was pretty mild in comparison. The first one just had so much more action and different stuff going on. So yeah, this one kind of surprised me how mild it was. It was just about them living in the town, and that's kind of it. So yeah, mild, but like I said, it set up everything for the third one. It seemed like much more of a bridge between the first and the third. So I'm still excited to read the third one. The next one I read was 17 Claws and a Blackbird by Augustina Bastrica. This is the author of Tender is the Flesh, and this is a bunch of short stories. And man, I really did enjoy this one. Well, there are so many great just one-liners in here. Again, if you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen some of them. I posted some of them. There was just so much raw emotion in this. Like, man, some of these stories were fucked up. A lot of them were about like loss or being mistreated or, you know, suicide or just some messed up stuff, grieving, going nuts. There was a lot in here. The reason I don't read collections of short stories all that much is because I read books, you know, I actually read books pretty slowly considering I've been reading my whole life, but I go through a lot of books. And so when I'm stuck on a novel, I have the full 300 pages to analyze what's going on, to kind of, you know, make my own meaning and analyze it and come up with my own metaphors for what I think the book is actually about or whatever. But when they're a group of short stories, you have to move from one to the other so quickly that, you know, you don't have an hour of time to just contemplate what that story means to you. So it's one that I'll definitely have to go back and revisit. But man, there are some great stories in here, some really great one-liners. This one says, "Mama is on the moon and I miss her. She calls me and says, I want you to come here because the dead scare me." Oh, this line from the same story broke my heart. So that same little girl whose mom passed away is talking about her dad. It says, "It was like he wanted to cry, but he couldn't because he hadn't had enough to drink." I mean, just geez Louise. But I think this one does kind of showcase her writing ability. Not more than Tender is the Flesh, because I do enjoy that book, but I know a lot of people didn't like it because it's told in such a mundane manner, and I think that they thought that that was the writer's writing style, but I personally believe it was there for a reason. The story is supposed to be told in a mundane manner because it's something so horrendous like eating people that when it's told in such a mundane way, it's even more disturbing. You know what I mean? Like, it's trying to tell you this is the norm. Nobody thinks twice about it. So I think this kind of showcases her writing ability a little bit more. For people who didn't like Tender is the Flesh, maybe this would be a good option. I don't know, it depends. There's so many quotes that are good, but I just don't know if they would make sense out of context, you know? I liked this line. "Regret that you're unable to poke your eyes out, that you don't have the courage, that you don't know how to live through a real tragedy, that you're not Greek." Like, even this one just, I think, shows the uniqueness of her stories. It's called Candy Pink, this short story, and it says, "Step 1, this is the very first line. "Step 1, observe the tears falling on your fingers. Think of diamonds." There's just some really beautiful writing in here, and it actually reminded me a lot of short stories I would read in college. Almost like a Junot Diaz, maybe? I don't know why, because they're very different, but both of those writers, I think, deal with really raw, emotional, like kind of fucked up things wrapped up in a story. And they are, I mean, Junot Diaz's stories read more like nonfiction, and her stories definitely read more like fiction. But for some reason, reading them brought me back to my college days and short stories that I would have read for class. But anyways, sorry I talked so much in this video, but I just had a lot to say about these books. But let me know if you guys would prefer these kind of longer, a little bit more deep dives into each story versus what I typically do. I just kind of give you a synopsis and move on. Let me know. But that's what I read in January. Let me know what you guys read and if you've enjoyed any stories so far. If I were going to recommend anything, it would be Boys in the Valley. You will be hearing me talk about that one an awful lot this year, I can promise you that. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys!
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.